my thanks to your team, which is just doing extraordinary work every day to protect this nation. Let me try to level set a bit on what the consequences have been at the border while we have had the Title 42 authority in place, because I'm sure there will be questions at this hearing about it. First, Title 42 is a public health authority, not an immigration authority, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. That authority rests in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC.
Therefore, when a person arrives and DHS exercises Title 42 authority against an asylum seeker, are there any consequences if they come again to the border, or are they just turned back around under Title 42 authority a second time?
Mr. Chairman, the Title 42 authority is imposed with respect to an individual who's encountered in between the port of entry, whether they are an asylum seeker or not, and I think that's very important. What happens is the individual is actually not removed. They are not in immigration enforcement proceedings. Rather, they are expelled. So they do not have a record in immigration enforcement proceedings, and therefore what we have seen is an extraordinary rise in recidivism because there isn't really a consequence from a law enforcement perspective. There is only essentially a turnaround. And so while the numbers are very high, those are numbers that do not reflect the number of unique individuals encountered at the border, but actually the number of encounters, including recidivism.
So let me give you an example. If you have recidivism rates in a particular sector like Rio Grande that are 45 to 48%, that means that in that sector, if you had 8,000 encounters on a particular week, roughly 38,000, almost half of those encounters, are going to be repeat crossers. Is that a sort of correct understanding of how this works?
Yes, without ascribing to the particular math, which would take me too long. But in all candor with this committee, which I will always have, the number of unique encounters has increased as well.
And I think that's just important for this committee to understand, is that when you see these elevated numbers on the border, much of this is frankly a result of Title 42 authority, which is essentially incentivizing individuals to come back over and over again to our border, because Title 42 does not allow you to set in motion a set of potential criminal consequences for individuals that present at the border. So that would be my last questions. If we get rid of Title 42 authority, return to sort of the foundational immigration law, there are both civil and potentially criminal consequences for individuals that repeatedly seek to enter the United States that are not available to you under Title 42. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, a court has recently ordered that, in fact, when Title 42 is in effect, we cannot use as fully as we had intended our enforcement authorities. But when Title 42 comes to an end, we will continue to enforce immigration law, both in the civil context and, as the facts warrant, in the criminal context with criminal prosecutions.
I'm going to have a few more questions related to the border in the second round, but let me ask you one additional question on another topic, and that is, as you mentioned, the elevated priority that you have placed on fighting domestic extremism. There's, as you know, a whistleblower complaint that was filed by a senior official at DHS alleging that he was asked to avoid intelligence assessments on white nationalists, amongst other topics. And this speaks to how fraught this work is, right? There are going to be Republicans, when Democrats are running DHS, who are going to worry that a focus on domestic terrorism and extremism will target voices to the right of the political spectrum, just as there will be those in the Democratic Party who will worry that if a Republican is in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, that the focus will be on those voices on the left, or they will ignore threats on the right. How do you build an enhanced domestic terrorism focus at the department that avoids these political pitfalls? How do you make sure that you are standing up capacities that look at threats regardless of where they may happen to fall on the political spectrum, because the legitimacy of this effort is dependent upon your ability to answer the questions that come from both sides on this work.
Mr. Chairman, there are a few foundational principles that are extraordinarily important to articulate in response to your question. The department does not combat speech. The department is involved in protecting the homeland, protecting the security of the homeland. And we become involved when there is a connectivity to violence. That is our mission, and we have been executing on that mission for years and years since the commencement of this department. And one of the threats is the threat of disinformation. We see it from Russia. We see it from the cartels, the peddling of disinformation that threatens the security of the homeland. And when that threat is evident, that is when we become involved. And what we recently rolled out, albeit not as effectively as we had hoped to, was we rolled out an effort, a working group, to bring together the experts throughout our department to ensure that our ongoing work in combating disinformation is done in a way that does not infringe on free speech, a fundamental constitutional right embedded in the First Amendment, nor on the right of privacy or other civil rights and civil liberties. That is a core obligation of ours, and what we did is set up a working group precisely to ensure that there are guardrails and protections in place to protect those fundamental rights.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr.